Up to 10% when you bundle auto and renter's insurance. Get a quote today.
Extreme power, extreme speed. From the X-1 that broke the sound barrier to the scramjet aiming for Mach 10. Planes on the cutting edge. From the past, the present, and the future. Now, extreme aircraft on modern marvels. In March of 2004, a test plane mounted on a rocket carried aloft by a bomber made history at Edwards Air Force Base north of Los Angeles. Launch. After release from its B-52 mothership, the small unmanned X-43 flew with the amazing speed of Mach 7, faster than any known jet aircraft has ever flown.
It was a very significant event. Some people have even gone so far as to equate it actually with the Wright brothers' flight.
When it separated from the rocket, the X-43 accelerated on its own power to Mach 7.
Mach 7 is approximately 5,000 miles per hour, so you can imagine flying New York to Los Angeles in just over a half an hour.
The NASA Dryden Flight Research Center says the scramjet-powered X-43 is capable of reaching at least Mach 10. A scramjet is a supersonic combustion ramjet. The ramjet, sometimes called the flying stovepipe, is one of the simplest engine designs ever conceived, with virtually no moving parts. It's basically a hollow tube into which fuel is injected and ignited. Unlike regular jets, there are no compressor blades inside to compress the air. In a ramjet, supersonic air is slowed down to subsonic speed inside the jet engine. But in a scramjet, the air moves through the engine at supersonic speed.
The X-43 vehicle has to endure some very extreme temperatures. The temperature along the leading edges of the vehicle, for example, are in excess of 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit.
The front of the X-43 and the leading edges of the tail are made of carbon-carbon, a lightweight and strong composite material that can withstand extremely high temperatures.
Carbon-carbon that we use is sort of a high-tech cousin to carbon fiber. It's the carbon itself is different. It's a much higher temperature. The bonding agent is much higher temperature. It's good to 3,000 degrees without degrading. It doesn't wear away.
What you see is the front end of the vehicle, the tungsten nose. The very front edge is the carbon-carbon leading edge that provides the thermal protection. As you can see, there's a lot of complicated machinery and very densely packed systems inside this vehicle in order to make it work.
A number of small electric motors on the aircraft are controlled by computer signals from the ground.
Motors on these electric actuators move the surfaces. That's how we maintain control of the vehicle in flight.
Ignition. Keeping the fuel burning inside the engine at supersonic speeds has been described as trying to keep a match lit in a hurricane.
The flame doesn't really blow out because there are areas in the engine, small areas that aren't supersonic, that allow a flame to grab hold and to sustain itself.
There's something about flying that fast that I think just captures the imagination of folks. It's just phenomenal to imagine flying that fast.
I'd say the main interest you find for the scramjet in the near term would be the military. They would like to have a missile that goes, say, Mach 5, Mach 6, 5 or 6 times the speed of sound, so it can get to a target very quickly and has a lot of range in doing that. You can do that now with a solid rocket motor, but it runs out of gas pretty quickly.
Are you feeling overwhelmed at work? Well, get ahead with AI. Grammarly is the AI writing tool that I trust to get
The Air Force is also interested in using scramjet propulsion for super-fast bombers that could strike anywhere in the world with amazing speed, flying more than 10 times as fast as current bombers.
There's no reason that a human couldn't pilot or be a passenger on a hypersonic airplane. Vision vehicles, as we call them, include space access vehicles to take astronauts to the space station or to orbit, and also potentially passenger vehicles, again, to take people to the other side of the world.
Some experts believe the scramjet could usher in a whole new era in aviation.
We entered the 19th century moving at 6 miles an hour, the speed of an animal-drawn vehicle. We entered the 20th century moving at 60 miles an hour, the speed of a steam locomotive. We entered the 21st century at 600 miles an hour, the speed of an intercontinental jet airliner. And if you plot this in semi-logarithmic fashion, you get a nice straight line that indicates we may well enter the next century at 6,000 miles an hour, which is precisely where you see the X-43 really pointing us and heading in that direction.
The X-43 scramjet is carrying on a tradition of cutting-edge aircraft development that goes back decades. And although Mach 7 is a major accomplishment for an air-breathing jet engine, rocket-powered planes were flying almost that fast decades ago. It all began with the most amazing series of extreme aircraft in aviation history. They were called the X-planes, the X standing for experimental. The very first X-plane was appropriately named the X-1.
In 1944, the United States decided to bite the bullet, really, and develop a specialized family of research airplanes, of which the X-1 was first, that would essentially use the sky as a laboratory and which would carry 500 pounds of recording instrumentation and at the same time would also radio very important values that were measured in flight down to ground stations. This marked the birth, really, of a remarkable family of airplanes that continues to the present day, the so-called X series.
The Bell X-1 is arguably the most famous pure research aircraft ever built. Bell Aircraft built 3 X-1 rocket planes for the primary purpose of breaking the sound barrier. For decades, traveling faster than the speed of sound, about 660 miles an hour at high altitude, had seemed an impossible task, hence the term barrier. It literally was seen by many as an impenetrable wall.
This was really brought home in September 1946 when Britain's leading test pilot, Geoffrey de Havilland, the son of the founder of the de Havilland Company, was killed at about 8/10 the speed of sound flying a new swept-wing tailless research airplane called the de Havilland Swallow. The airplane began to pitch violently out of control so rapidly that he could not control it, and within less than a second it had disintegrated and he was killed. This showed that the sound barrier had very real bite.
In 1947, a young Air Force pilot named Chuck Yeager was about to bite back. It would happen at Muroc Air Force Base in California, about 80 miles north of Los Angeles. We know it now as Edwards Air Force Base. Robert Cardenas, another young fighter pilot, was officer in charge on the X-1 program, and he piloted the bomber that carried the X-1 aloft.
I had professors from Caltech and MIT that were out there at Muroc. We had all sorts of people making recommendations, and one of them said, you know, really, we've seen stuff coming in from space explode. Whether it was from heat or what, there could be an ultrasonic barrier out there that might just disintegrate or melt the aircraft.
The test pilots and engineers listened politely to the experts and then got down to business. Bell Aircraft test pilot Chalmers Goodland made the first powered flight in an X-1 aircraft in late 1946. But it would be Chuck Yeager who 10 months later would take the X-1 rocket plane to the speed at which it was meant to fly.
Chuck is a human being, but when he gets in that seat and he locks that door, he becomes part of the machine. In my book, he's no longer a human. He's part of that. He melds in as part of that machine.
Man and machine finally broke through the sound barrier in October of 1947. On the ground, observers heard the crack of a sonic boom. Air Force Captain Chuck Yeager and the X-1 had just launched a new era of supersonic flight.
Chuck was the X-1, period. That was it. And I really don't know if anyone else could have done it.
High airspeeds are described in Mach numbers, using a formula named after an Austrian physicist, Ernst Mach. The speed of sound is Mach 1, and Yeager had reached Mach 1.06 on that historic flight. Later generations of X-1 aircraft would fly twice that speed.
Okay, drop it, Daddy. Drop.
In 1953, Chuck Yeager took one of them to Mach 2.44. Many more X-planes would follow the X-1, but none would provide more crucial research data than the X-15. The three rocket-powered X-15 aircraft flew 199 flights from 1963 to 1967. Far beyond supersonic, these research planes ushered in the era of hypersonic flight, the term for speeds greater than Mach 5.
We had a 57,000-pound thrust rocket engine that was completely throttleable, the first of its kind, and you had tremendous problems in simply making this a reliable propulsion system. Now, once we did, all speed and altitude records very quickly were eclipsed by this airplane. It went out and immediately took us in a piloted sense to Mach 4, Mach 5, Mach 6.
As rocket planes like the X-1 and X-15 made amazing progress pushing the limits of speed, they paved the way for a new top-secret aircraft that to this day inspires awe, the SR-71 Blackbird. In 1967, one of the X-15 set a speed record for manned flight in a winged aircraft, exceeded only by the Space Shuttle. Extreme Aircraft will return on Modern Marvels. We now return to Extreme Aircraft on Modern Marvels. Cloaked in secrecy, two American spy planes, the U-2 and the SR-71 Blackbird, made their mark on history during the Cold War. The U-2 was the first to become operational in 1956. Built originally for the CIA by the Lockheed Advanced Development Projects Group, better known as the Skunk Works, the U-2 could fly higher than any aircraft in existence at the time and provided crucial intelligence on Soviet military activities.
When there was worry that the Soviet Union might be gathering a bomber fleet or might be gathering its forces for an attack on Western Europe or whatever else it might be up to, there was no way, literally, to penetrate this iron curtain, say, fly over it.
To operate at 70,000 feet and higher, the U-2's jet engine had to be virtually hand-built, with much closer tolerances to reduce air pressure losses at high altitudes. Flying long transatlantic missions alone at night, navigating only by the stars with a sextant, the U-2 pilots collected intelligence that dramatically improved America's ability to assess the Soviet threat.
The U-2 operations really gave rise to some remarkable images. There was imagery brought back that showed Soviet fighters trying to climb and catch it, stalling, spinning out of control, falling to earth, other airplanes trying to do so-called pop-ups to get to altitude. Clearly they knew we were there, but they were very frustrated at not being able to reach us with airplanes.
The long, wide, straight wings of the U-2 gave the plane glider-like characteristics. And it would soar so far above the ground that even if the Soviet military detected it, they couldn't reach it with fighters or missiles. Or so it was believed, until May 1st, 1960. On that day, Francis Gary Powers was shot down by Soviet missiles as he took photos from 67,000 feet. After Powers successfully ejected, the Soviets put him on trial for espionage. The incident severely strained U.S.-Soviet relations. Powers was released 2 years later. Today, high-altitude reconnaissance is done mainly by satellites, but an updated version of the U-2 has provided battlefield intelligence in Bosnia, Kosovo, Afghanistan, and Iraq. It is also being used for high-altitude research projects by NASA and other civilian agencies.
We do earth sciences. NASA has done it for 30 years or more. And that requires overflight over forest fires, over forests, desert, into the Arctic to check on the ozone layer, which NASA first discovered. We fly a bigger variant of the U-2, but we have two of them, and we fly them worldwide on various missions of those kinds.
As effective and enduring as the U-2 has been, it wasn't enough to meet America's reconnaissance needs at the height of the Cold War. Once again, the Lockheed Skunk Works, headed by the legendary Kelly Johnson, was tapped to come up with something better. And in 1962, they outdid themselves. The SR-71 Blackbird, a high-speed, high-altitude spy plane, is revered by many as one of the greatest jet planes ever built. The ethereal Blackbird could fly higher and faster than any jet aircraft in production, and that still holds today.
I knew that this airplane was going to be the fastest in the world. What I didn't know was it would remain the fastest for 40 years. That's astonishing. But I remember back in the 60s, Kelly used to say, and he'd say it kind of aggressively, like, I challenge anyone to adversely comment on this. He says, nobody's going to produce an airplane with greater performance than this one by the year 2000. And back then I used to think, well, I hope I hang around long enough for the year 2000 to see if that turns out to be accurate, because before this came along, every 2 or 3 years somebody somewhere would produce one faster.
As with the U-2, the initial client was the CIA, not the Air Force. The first version was called the A-12 and made its first flight in spring of 1962. To be able to withstand the heat generated by sustained speeds above Mach 3, the A-12 had to be designed from scratch with new technology and new materials.
We would say this is roughly an 800-degree Fahrenheit airplane. Some things are hotter, but we have some cooler. I understand the self-cleaning oven is around 425 and the soldering iron around 550. So that gives you an idea of what kind of heat we're talking here.
The airframe was made from titanium and titanium alloys, and the structure was coated with a special radar-absorbing black paint that helped dissipate the heat. Because the aircraft surface was designed to expand from the heat during flight, the plane would leak fuel while sitting on the ground. The expansion would cause the entire aircraft to grow a couple of inches in length.
This is the ejection sequence initiator, and you're flying along and the canopy is closed, and you want to get out, so you pull this thing up. The first thing that happens is this canopy goes, and then up you go, and as you come out you turn like this, and then you're dynamic this way, and you deploy a stability chute, a small chute just for stability, and the G's may knock you out, but it won't be death concern on that. And as you're coming down, you may still be unconscious, and then when you hit 15,000 feet, it cuts away that baby drogue chute for stability and deploys a large 35-foot chute.
The aircraft was about 100 feet long and could carry 20 tons of special JP-7 jet fuel in the fuselage and wing tanks, enough to fly for about 2 hours. During this time, the high-flying spy plane could survey about 200,000 square miles of the Earth's surface. The CIA's highly classified single-seat A-12 version first flew in 1962, and the Air Force's twin-seat SR-71 version first flew in 1964. The two planes were nearly identical, and both could fly faster than Mach 3 at heights above 85,000 feet. The CIA continued to fly the A-12 until 1968, when the Air Force Blackbirds, based at Edwards Air Force Base, took over the reconnaissance duties. It wasn't only the fastest and highest flying airplane of its day, it also pioneered what today is called stealth, the ability to evade detection by radar.
That airplane has these very blended shapes and sharp chines, and it's got the tails folded in and so on. And they, did not much by calculation, but a large amount by intuition and by taking it out to a radar range, sort of the equivalent of a wind tunnel for radar, with models and trying different shapes and so on. And basically, by the time you saw the thing on radar going at Mach 3, it was gone.
But now the Blackbird really is gone. The military mothballed the SR-71 fleet in 1990, claiming satellites could do the job better. 2 of the Blackbirds were temporarily reactivated in 1995. Before there ever was an SR-71 Blackbird, another, even more futuristic-looking aircraft was being tested at Muroc. And this one was so far ahead of its time, it would have to wait decades before aviation technology caught up with it. In 1974, An SR-71 Blackbird flew from New York to London in a record 1 hour, 54 minutes, and 56 seconds. Extreme Aircraft will return on Modern Marvels. We now return to Extreme Aircraft on Modern Marvels. Flying Wing says it all about the appearance of two of America's most futuristic-looking bombers. One from the past, and one from the present. Although separated by nearly half a century, they have exactly the same wingspan and were developed by the same company. The original Northrop Flying Wing bomber first flew in 1946. Its contemporary counterpart, the B-2, had its first flight in 1989 and will probably still be flying decades from now. Aircraft pioneer Jack Northrop was a champion of the flying wing design, which eliminates the standard fuselage and tail found on most aircraft.
Northrop, who was a consummate master of aircraft design, the most important designer of the interwar period in the United States, not just because of his flying wings, but because he's taking all the cutting-edge developments in high-speed aerodynamics and streamlining, and he's putting this together. Northrop felt the next logical step was the pure flying wing. This became almost an obsession with him.
In 1941, Northrop was awarded a contract to develop and build the XB-35 Flying Wing bomber, capable of carrying a bomb load of over 52,000 pounds with a range of 7,500 miles. World War II was over by the time the XB-35 first took to the air in 1946, powered by 4 piston engines. The following year, the YB-49 Flying Wing with 8 jet engines made its first flight. Air Force Major Robert Cardenas, the officer in charge of the X-1 project, was also chief test pilot for the YB-49 Flying Wing. Because of the plane's unconventional flight characteristics, Cardenas was nearly killed when he tried to put the flying wing into a stall during testing.
When you start slowing down, there's one point at which the airflow over the wing ceases to create lift and you quit flying. And it shudders and it shakes. That's a stall. But I was waiting for the shudder, and instead of that, it just gave kind of a lurch and it went over backwards and started tumbling backwards. So I reached up and I hit the left throttle full power on the left side. Even though it was tumbling, this side went up, tumbling it over into more of an inverted spin, and I could get out of that.
Although Northrop insisted the flying wing couldn't possibly tumble, Bob Cardenas knew it could. And he warned his good friend Glenn Edwards, another test pilot, about the problem. Cardenas was apparently proven right by a tragic accident in 1948 that killed Captain Edwards. Edwards was testing the flying wing when it crashed for unknown reasons, killing all 5 members of the crew.
I think they were stall entry maneuvers, and maybe they entered it at a little higher speed than I did, because on that first lurch where it goes over backwards, the load is on the wing like this kind of a load, and that's what broke off. The wings broke off outboard of those jet engines.
The last thing Edwards wrote on his notepad indicates he may have put the airplane into a stall, in spite of the advice he got from Bob Cardenas.
One of the things that they had found was one knee pad card, which said stall entry maneuvers.
The accident would change Muroc Air Force Base forever. It was renamed Edwards Air Force Base in honor of Cardenas' friend and fellow test pilot. In spite of severe problems with the aircraft, the YB-49 Flying Wing program continued, and Cardenas was developing strong misgivings.
I did not want them to buy the airplane.
Nevertheless, in 1949, one of the planes set a new transcontinental speed record when Major Cardenas piloted a flying wing from Muroc to Andrews Air Force Base near Washington, D.C. in 4 hours and 20 minutes. President Truman was there and was favorably impressed.
Truman came up in the cockpit and he looked around. He was a pretty crusty old guy. He used a little more foul language than I'm going to say. He said it looked pretty goddamn good to him. He said he's going to buy some. I bit my tongue. Then down on the ground, he turned to the Chief of the Air Force and he said, why don't you have this young whippersnapper fly this down Pennsylvania Avenue? Rooftop level, I want people to see what I'm going to buy. So I did. I slowed down. I slowed down to about 300, 350 knots. But I had never really realized how heavily forested the city of Washington really is. It's a jungle. Well, while going down the avenue and losing the avenue amongst the trees, all of a sudden I looked up and the Capitol Dome was straight ahead. So I had to pull up to go over it. Somebody on the steps took this picture as we were going over the top.
The ill-fated trip back to Muroc would help bring the troubled Flying Wing project to an end. During the flight, 6 of the bomber's 8 jet engines caught fire, forcing an emergency landing in Winslow, Arizona. Later that year, the Air Force's order for 30 Flying Wing bombers was canceled. But the Northrop Company wasn't finished with the Flying Wing idea. By 1981, aviation technology had changed dramatically, with electronic fly-by-wire controls making a Flying Wing design much more feasible.
Fly-by-wire is basically computer controlled. There's no hydraulic or cable linkage to the controls. The computer is monitoring what you want it to do and adjusts the flight controls in accordance with what you're asking the airplane to do.
Northrop Grumman won a contract to build the Air Force a new bomber that would use Jack Northrop's Flying Wing concept. Apparently, Jack Northrop got the dimensions right the first time. The new Flying Wing, called the B-2, would have exactly the same 172-foot wingspan as the old Flying Wing.
The build of that wing was a very, very challenging activity for us. The team overcame day in and day out. We used to call it an invention a day to get us through the day. And it's probably as exciting a time as you'd ever come across.
It's a very highly integrated aircraft, very complicated, very complex. She's a very smart aircraft. Once she's all put together, you can't do anything to her you're not supposed to. She'll let you know.
Jack Northrop, who was still very alert and very much interested in flight, had the chance, shortly before he died, to learn about the existence of the B-2 program. And he was very touched. And he said now he knew why God had let him live as long as he had.
The B-2 stealth bomber was first revealed to the public in 1988, when it was rolled out of its hangar at the Air Force's Plant 42. To many, it signified that the Flying Wing design had finally become a successful bomber.
To me, it was vindication for Glenn's death. My work and his death were not in vain. We did accomplish something. We didn't do it, but somebody accomplished the final act of making a system like that.
The B-2's first flight came the following year, with test pilot Bruce Hines at the controls.
When Bruce Hines was going to fly it, they asked me to talk to him. I told him, I can't tell you anything. It's a different airplane. Just one thing, Bruce, don't stall the airplane. And so after he flew it, I said, Bruce, did you try stalling him? He said, Bob, the damn thing won't let you. It won't let you stall it.
The first production B-2 was delivered to the Air Force in 1993. The 69-foot-long bombers are powered by 4 jet engines and carry 2 pilots. They're designed to carry 40,000 pounds of conventional or nuclear bombs and can fly at altitudes up to 50,000 feet. B-2s are subsonic, which means their top speed is just under the speed of sound. The fleet of 21 B-2s based at Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri first proved itself in combat in Kosovo, where B-2s destroyed more than 30% of Serbian targets in 8 weeks by flying non-stop missions from Missouri to Kosovo and back. The B-2 is much more technically sophisticated than America's other long-range bombers, the B-52 and the B-1.
The B-1 as well as the B-52 are not stealthy platforms.
Bombers are powered by 4 jet engines and carry 2 pilots. They're designed to carry 40,000 pounds of conventional or nuclear bombs and can fly at altitudes up to 50,000 feet. B-2s are subsonic, which means their top speed is just under the speed of sound. The fleet of 21 B-2s based at Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri first proved itself in combat in Kosovo, where B-2s destroyed more than 30% of Serbian targets in 8 weeks by flying non-stop missions from Missouri to Kosovo and back. The B-2 is much more technically sophisticated than America's other long-range bombers, the B-52 and the B-1.
The B-1 as well as the B-52 are not stealthy platforms. Only the B-2 bomber can penetrate heavily defended airspace, fly for thousands of miles undetected, carrying a huge load of weapons, deliver those weapons precisely, and get out of that area without being detected.
Jack Northrop would be more than proud, and proud of the people every bit as much as he's proud of what the people have done with the technology, and certainly some of the very basic vision that he had years and years ago.
With the B-2, the U.S. Air Force unquestionably has the most modern bomber in the skies. Now, they need a fighter to match. Enter the F-A-22 Raptor. In Operation Enduring Freedom, the B-2 flew a 44-hour mission with mid-air refueling from Missouri to Afghanistan to an air base at Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean. Extreme aircraft will return on Modern Marvels. We now return to Extreme Aircraft on Modern Marvels. The McDonnell Douglas F-15 Eagle first flew in 1972. And reigned unchallenged for decades as the world's premier air superiority fighter. But the new F-A-22 Raptor will finally bring that reign to an end. Both the F-15 and the Raptor fly and climb faster than conventional jet fighters. This enables them to dominate air-to-air battles with enemy planes, which means they can deny the skies to the enemy. Hence the term air superiority fighter.
The goal in developing a fighter airplane is really to make certain that you can totally, overwhelmingly dominate the opponent. If you look at the F-15, it became America's most successful air combat fighter. Indeed, you can argue historically it's the most successful air combat fighter of all time, because it has never been shot down in air-to-air combat while shooting down close to 200 opponents in air-to-air combat.
In 1975, 20 F-15 Eagles were modified to make them even faster. Called Streak Eagles, they set several time-to-climb records that still stand. But the new F-A-22 Raptor is expected to break those records and bring new meaning to the term air superiority.
The F-15 is very old in the tooth. You know, if we take a look at our fighter forces today, you realize that if these airplanes were automobiles, they'd be wearing classic car plates.
After a testing and validation program lasting 4.5 years, the industry team of Lockheed Martin and Boeing in 1991 won the competition to build the next generation air superiority fighter that would replace the aging fleet of F-15s.
It capitalizes on a number of technological revolutions, and this enables us to get first look at an opponent, first shot at that opponent, and first kill, where we are literally moving out of the fight before the enemy realizes they're being attacked.
You can detect him, you can fire a missile on him, and he'll almost blow up before he even knows you're there. So it's not that you're undetectable, but by the time he does detect you, you already have such an offensive advantage on him that it's really not even a competition.
The production version of the F-22 design, now called the Raptor, first flew in 1997. Like the F-15 Eagle, it can reach supersonic speeds. But the Raptor can cruise without using fuel-hungry afterburners, giving an enemy less time to engage it. The F-A-22 is also easier to fly.
An Air Force pilot who was training to fly the F-A-22 told a bunch of reporters recently on the trip that I took that traditionally a pilot had to spend about 85–90% of his or her brain power just to attain a situational awareness, just to take the information from each of his sensors and understand what they were telling him. He says with the F-A-22 Raptor, that situational awareness is almost instantaneous, so he has most of his brain power left to devise how he's going to attack a certain target or how he's going to evade something, that type of of thing. So that's a real significant difference.
Another capability that gives the Raptor an edge is thrust vectoring, a system that allows the blast of hot gases coming out of the engine to be pointed in different directions. This allows the aircraft to change direction much more rapidly than conventionally powered fighters. Thrust vectoring was pioneered on the X-31, a NASA research plane built by Rockwell. The X-31 put on a dazzling display of thrust vectoring capabilities at the Paris Air Show in 1995.
Most people at the air show in Paris when they first saw that thought the airplane was going to crash. And then it just flies right on out and goes and does another maneuver. These people had never seen it, were just in awe.
The X-31 helped pave the way for the FA-22 Raptor's use of the thrust vectoring concept.
The maneuverability of the FA-22 in a dogfight is such that if you're in the merge and you're doing that spiraling telephone pole of death, you know, where you're going down, descending, losing altitude, and trying to outturn the other guy, with the FA-22, with that thrust vectoring, it allows you to put the nose right at the guy and fire a missile and end the engagement.
You initially try to start fighting just like you did in an F-15, and then you start to realize what capabilities you have and what limitations no longer apply to you. So you adapt real quickly, but it doesn't take someone very long. After a sortie or two, coming from the 15 into the F-22, it's an awesome capability.
The FA-22 is also stealthier than any other jet fighter, including the F-117 stealth fighter, which represents an older generation of stealth technology.
That's not very stealthy, right? But head on, you don't see much of the jet, and you don't have anything hanging on the wings to give your signature away. And so we like to say, beware of Raptors with open doors. You know, when the doors are open, that means that you're shooting something, and the doors open quick, shoot something and close before a radar signature gets transmitted back to the enemy. 'Cause even when the doors open, now suddenly you have sharp corners and weird angles, and that can reflect radar back in a direction you don't want to.
The Air Force plans to eventually purchase 339 Raptors, and production of the aircraft is scheduled to continue to 2013. The FA-22 is an Air Force pilot's dream. But there are planes on the horizon that may be more like a pilot's nightmare, because these aircraft have no pilots. The F-15 Eagle can climb at more than 40,000 feet per minute. That's sea level to the top of Mount Everest in 45 seconds. Extreme Aircraft will return on Modern Marvels. We now return to Extreme Aircraft on Modern Marvels. The Global Hawk spy plane points the way to what some believe will be a pilotless future. This UAV, or unmanned air vehicle, was seen in action by millions thanks to TV news coverage of its surveillance missions in Afghanistan and Iraq. The Global Hawk can conduct effective surveillance over an area the size of Illinois in just 24 hours. It can also loiter above a specific area, transmitting almost real-time high-resolution images to field commanders. 44 feet long and 15 feet high, the high-altitude reconnaissance aircraft was built for the Air Force by Northrop Grumman.
Global Hawk is an autonomous air vehicle. For instance, when Global Hawk did a deployment to Australia, the Global Hawk left California with a click of the mouse. It is fully autonomous, and then it flew across the Pacific Ocean and landed in Australia some 20-odd hours later, at which time somebody clicked the mouse again and shut the engine down on the system.
With its range of more than 14,000 miles and an ability to fly for 36 hours straight, it can travel to any point on the globe, conduct surveillance, and return to its base in the United States, all without a pilot. The Air Force rushed the Global Hawk into combat ahead of schedule in Afghanistan in November of 2001, and it was also used in Operation Iraqi Freedom. Although it flew only 5% of the surveillance missions over Iraq, it accounted for more than 55% of the information on time-sensitive targets, many of which were destroyed. After collecting more than 3,700 images over Iraq, the Hawk returned home in May of 2003. Air Force officials said the Global Hawk was over Iraq from the very beginning of the operation and had a direct impact on the Republican Guard's destruction. Although most use of UAVs so far has been for reconnaissance, there is growing interest in putting weapons on them. The Unmanned Combat Air Vehicle, or UCAV, is seen by some as the top gun of the future. One of the most dramatic first uses of an armed unmanned aircraft in combat came during Operation Iraqi Freedom, when Predator reconnaissance drones were outfitted with Hellfire missiles.
There's one famous mission that the Air Force likes to talk about during Iraqi Freedom. There was a broadcast tower from the Iraqi Information Agency in downtown Baghdad, and that tower was very close, I believe, to the Fox News tower and also to a mosque. And so it was a very, very dangerous target for the Air Force to go after. So what it did was it sent a Predator unmanned aircraft armed with Hellfire missiles into downtown Baghdad, and the remote pilot who was operating the aircraft from thousands of miles away in the ground control station was able to pinpoint that tower and actually take it out without any collateral damage to the Fox Tower or to the mosque.
The Air Force is now testing the Boeing X-45 UCAV demonstrator, which first flew in 2002.
The X-45 is the first unmanned aircraft that has been designed from its inception to be a combat vehicle.
Mark impact. A larger version, the X-45C, is the precursor of Air Force UCAVs that will become operational in 2010. The X-45C will be nearly 40 feet long, with a wingspan of nearly 50 feet. It will be able to carry 8 GPS-guided bombs, weighing 250 pounds each in its internal weapons bays. Northrop Grumman is also testing an unmanned combat air vehicle, the X-47A Pegasus. It was designed as a flight demonstrator for the X-47B that could be used by the Navy.
Pegasus was our UCAV demonstrator. It was a company-funded investment. The way we approached the Pegasus was basically to demonstrate that, in fact, you could take an unmanned combat air vehicle and land it on the deck of an aircraft carrier.
There is still some debate, even within the military, about how and when UCAV should be deployed.
I think there's just this sort of rules of the game, ethical bridge to be crossed of, is it okay for a drone to be, and firing, and are we really sure that that's Osama and, not the head of the orphanage who's walking along the street? There's a lot of, queasiness about doing this because, you're looking through a soda straw on these things, and, are you really sure that's the guy? The chances of making a mistake are pretty high, and you really obviously don't want to kill innocent people.
We must be very, very careful that we don't develop systems that are so complex that they really transgress whether or not they should be inhabited systems. There's a tremendous value in having the inhabited system because, to be frank about it, an inhabited aircraft carries with it a great deal of innate common sense that sometimes you don't have in a system that's relying on a lineup of ones and zeros.
It remains to be seen how commercial airline pilots and private pilots will feel about sharing airspace with planes that have no pilots.
Years ago, if any one of us got into an elevator, there was an operator, an attendant inside the elevator. Today, I certainly don't see that person in the elevator anymore. You get at many airports today, and you want to get to another terminal. You get on an unmanned train, And we accept that. It's normal. That's going to take place with UAVs for sure. The technology is there, the will is there, and it's now just a matter of time.
As aircraft technology continues its flight into the future, exciting possibilities are opening up that could change our lives and bring the world closer together, just as the jet age did.
The challenge for us today is to capitalize on some of these new technologies, and if we seize on that, we will indeed have, I think, a high-speed future. But if we do not, that future will be in the hands of other people.
America's very first jet, the P-59 Era Comet, took off and flew into the future more than 60 years ago. It was a dramatic new concept at the time, but it soon became commonplace and unremarkable. Perhaps 60 years from now, combat jets without pilots and scramjets that fly at Mach 10 will be considered commonplace and unremarkable too. Nevertheless, there will always be some aircraft defined by the term extreme.
America, while ships had been limited as
a parched and forbidding wasteland. To those who journeyed through it over the years, Western Mojave is a harsh, inhospitable land of sometimes stunning contrasts. A land of bone-chilling nights and griddle-hot days, of violent dust storms and mesmerizing sunsets. The primitive landscape was dominated by one truly remarkable feature. When she first gazed upon it early in this century, homesteader Jeanette Darr said of it, "I thought it was the jumping-off place of creation, that curiously flat wasteland called Dry Lake." Many years later, however, the aviation pioneer General Albert Boyd would call it God's gift to the Air Force. First formed in the Pleistocene epoch, Rogers Dry Lake is one of nature's most unique creations. Flattest and hardest of all natural landforms, its parched clay and silt surface undergoes a timeless cycle of renewal each year as water from winter storms is swept back and forth by desert winds, smoothing it out to an almost glass-like flatness. Spreading out over 65 square miles, it is the largest geological formation of its kind in the world. The open spaces of the high desert, its isolation, arid climate, the clear blue skies overhead, and most importantly, the vast expanse of lake beds, were what caught the attention of then Lieutenant Colonel Hap Arnold when, in 1933, he was looking about for a bombing and gunnery range for his Marchfield squadrons. What others had seen as a curiously flat wasteland, Hap Arnold saw a natural airfield. In September of that year, a small contingent of troops arrived at the spot then called Muroc and laid out a bombing and gunnery range along the east shore of the lake bed. For the troops who comprised the Muroc Range Maintenance Detachment throughout the 30s, the place had little to offer. Theirs would be a tough, hardscrabble existence, life in a primitive tent camp community, long days of backbreaking work with few of the conveniences of civilization and even fewer diversions. They relieved the tedium of their daily routines. Their isolation seemed so complete, in fact, that among locals they came to be known as the Foreign Legion of the Army Air Corps. Their lonely exile was periodically interrupted, however, as flying units came in for training exercises. Among the first to arrive was a young captain named Ira Eaker, commander of the 95th Pursuit Squadron and, a decade later, the entire 8th Air Force. He was followed by countless others, as the remote bombing and gunnery range more than lived up to Hap Arnold's expectations. Indeed, by 1941, Muroc had become a regular stop for the men who'd guide American air power through the perilous times ahead. By that time, though most of the range maintenance detachments still lived in tents, a new, more permanent facility was rising up across the lakebed. And while training exercises proceeded, there were other activities taking place almost unnoticed, which were harbingers of things to come. John Northrop had been flight testing his N1M Jeep, his first true flying wing, at Muroc since 1940. By the late fall of 1941, a primitive sled track had been built on the lakebed where small, remotely controlled aircraft were being ground tested. Not far away, an exotic-looking, semi-tailless airplane was undergoing taxi tests. The airplane was the Curtiss Wright CW-24B, a full-scale wood and fabric flying mock-up for a proposed interceptor. Now all but forgotten, the CW-24B lifted off from the parched surface of the lakebed for the first time on December 2, 1941, thereby becoming the first of more than 100 airplanes that would complete their maiden flights at this out-of-the-way place on the high desert. 5 days later, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, and Muroc suddenly erupted with activity as troops and flying units from all over the country hastily assembled there. Barracks, hangars, mess halls, and other facilities, marvels of tar paper, wire, and wood, as one of the troops called them, went up almost overnight at what became known as South Base. In July of 1942, Muroc Army Airfield finally became a separate post. Its primary mission was to provide final combat training for fighter and bomber crews. And throughout the war years, thousands of young men would pass through it just prior to overseas deployment. It was at Muroc in 1942, for example, that Lieutenant Colonel Curtis LeMay first assembled and trained his famed 305th Bomb Group, molding it into a legendary fighting unit which set new standards for effectiveness in the 8th Air Force. And it was to Muroc, late in the war, that a by then Major General LeMay would send the cream of his 21st Air Force for B-29 crew training as they prepared for the final assault on Japan. It was at Muroc that these crews perfected their ability to navigate over vast distances and employ their bombing equipment with the kind of pinpoint accuracy that would have such a decisive impact on the outcome of the Pacific War. While the training mission continued at the south end of the lakebed, a much different type of mission had gotten underway in a restricted area just 6 miles to the north. There, in a top-secret test site, pieces of a radically new type of aircraft were unloaded from boxcars on September 19, 1942, and over the next 10 days, it was hastily assembled. The airplane was the Bell XP-59A Aerocomet, and on October 2nd, Bell test pilot Bob Stanley launched America into the jet age as he lifted off from the lakebed. Testing continued over the next 2 years, and though the P-59 disappointingly lacked the performance of the best prop-driven fighters of the day, it nevertheless represented a start, the first of a long series of airplanes that would make the high desert base synonymous with the turbojet revolution in America. Indeed, the availability of the enormous lakebed made it almost inevitable. The development of the turbojet engine introduced a host of new problems. The new power plants were woefully underpowered, and thus the new jets required exceptionally long takeoff rolls. More critically still, the temperamental engines flamed out, and if pilots couldn't recover from engine stalls, their only hope was close proximity to a spacious airfield where they could attempt dead-stick landings. With miles and miles of available runways extending in every direction, the lakebed offered the most spacious landing field in the world. Throughout the decades ahead, it would be a welcome haven for countless pilots in distress. Thus, while the major training mission continued throughout the war, A growing number of aircraft, conventional airplanes such as the P-38 Lightning and the Lockheed Constellation, unconventional prototypes such as Northrop's XP-56 Black Bullet, purely experimental aircraft such as the N-9M and the rocket-powered MX-324, and even captured enemy aircraft such as the Me-163 Comet and the HE-162 Volksjager were also undergoing flight test evaluations at the rapidly expanding North Base facility. In January of 1944, a major milestone occurred when a new Lockheed jet-powered prototype, the XP-80, lifted off for its maiden flight, demonstrating the truly remarkable advances that had been made in little more than a year since the XP-59's first flight. This impressive airplane was the prototype for America's first combat-worthy jet fighter, the P-80 Shooting Star.
Where the P-59 had been outperformed by prop-driven fighters, the P-80 demonstrated in tests at Muroc that it could successfully attack bomber formations even when outnumbered 6-1 by the very best of the conventional fighters. And it convinced everyone that the Air Force would have to undergo a rapid transition into jet propulsion. The remarkable potential of that transition was underscored in June of 1947 when Colonel Albert Boyd returned the world speed record to America for the first time in 24 years, as he sped to more than 623 miles per hour over a course above the lake bed in a modified P-80R. It was the first of some 14 world speed records that would be set at the base over the next 18 years. But Boyd and other Air Force officials had set their sights much higher than speed records. As he stood proudly on the ramp that day, he'd already made a decision, which would dramatically alter the future course of aviation and indeed aerospace history. For he'd chosen the pilot and test crew who'd challenged the so-called and much dreaded sound barrier. The X-1 program was the first in a long series of X, or experimental programs, that were designed to prove or disprove concepts, to probe the most challenging unknowns of flight, and solve their mysteries. It was conceived in response to a new and terrifying phenomenon, which fighter pilots had first encountered during the recent war. Pushing over into steep dives, they'd found themselves at speeds of 500 miles per hour and into the unknown region of transonic flight, where the effects of compressibility, loss of control, and structurally devastating aerodynamic loads began to take over with often deadly consequences. The new jet engines promised even higher speeds, passing through the transonic and even perhaps into the supersonic region. The critical question was, could a piloted airplane be designed and built which could survive in it? The aircraft designed to make the assault was the bullet-shaped and rocket-powered Bell X-1, and the man who would try to fly it through the sonic wall was a young Air Force captain named Chuck Yeager. Assisted by a team from Bell and the NACA, the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, he and project engineer Captain Jack Ridley had a lot on their minds as Yeager edged his way cautiously toward Mach 1 throughout the fall of 1947. Military test pilots at that time didn't get many opportunities to fly such hazardous experimental programs. Plus, he felt he had a lot to prove as the B-29 lifted off for his 9th powered flight on the morning of October 14th. He'd already flown out to Mach 0.997, just a hair's breadth away from the sonic wall. And yet, what lay ahead was still a mystery. There were still many who thought that what he was attempting was tantamount to suicide. At 20,000 feet, the X-1 was released. Igniting the chambers of his rocket engine, Yeager began to climb. Then at 43,000 feet, the X-1 shot through the sound barrier and remained supersonic for about 20 seconds. The sharp double crack of the sonic boom that morning signaled the dawn of a remarkable era, during which a high desert outpost called Muroc would become identified with the most daring concepts of aviation. It had triggered a series of events which would ultimately evolve man beyond the atmosphere and into space. But first, the remarkable potential of the turbojet engine had to be realized, and there were perplexing challenges to be overcome before that could happen. Not only were the early engines underpowered, they also consumed enormous quantities of fuel, which severely limited range capability. Turboprops offered an attractive alternative, but the XP-81's performance simply couldn't match that promised by pure jet configurations. The XF-85 Goblin embodied the so-called parasite concept. Designed to be carried in the bomb bay of a heavy bomber, it would be carried deep into enemy territory, released, chase off enemy interceptors, and then return and hook up with the mothership. On the first hookup attempt, however, the test pilot was nearly decapitated. And though a successful hookup was ultimately accomplished, the idea wasn't really practical. Another solution was to build big fighters which could carry vast quantities of fuel. But this was a self-defeating solution, producing increased weight and drag, which imposed unacceptable performance penalties. Thus, most of the long procession of fighter prototypes that were put through their paces at Muroc during the post-war years represented little more than transitional designs. As engine designers tried to build more powerful and fuel-efficient engines, the aircraft designers struggled to develop airframes that could optimize their potential. Most of the new prototypes were overweight, underpowered, and during a time of dramatic technological breakthroughs, already obsolete compared to new designs then coming off the drawing boards. The North American XF-86 was by far the most successful of these transitional designs. The first American jet to employ swept wings to delay the onset of compressibility and enhance high-speed maneuverability, it was already diving to supersonic speeds just 6 months after it first flew in October of 1947, and it went on to enjoy a better than 10-to-1 kill ratio against enemy fighters in hostile skies over Korea. Post-war bomber development ran into many of the same problems encountered by the fighter programs. Most of the new prototype bombers on the ramp at Muroc represented early attempts to blend the new turbojet technology with conventional aerodynamic designs. In fact, America's first jet bomber, the Douglas XB-43, resulted from a simple, straightforward modification of a piston-engined XB-42. Graceful and streamlined, the XB-46 was already considered obsolete when it arrived at Muroc at the end of its first flight in April of 1947. And the robust B-45, though it went into operational service, was from the very outset never intended to serve as anything more than an interim bomber. As with the fighters, the first true advance came with the introduction of swept wings in Boeing's B-47. Capable of speeds in excess of 600 miles per hour, this airplane was developed into the thoroughbred of the Air Force's post-war bomber fleet. The most radical design by far, however, was Northrop's Mammoth Flying Wing. Originally designed with a complicated system of pusher props and designated the XB-35, it was ultimately reconfigured with jets, transformed into the majestic YB-49. The culmination of Northrop's attempts to build a pure flying wing represented a bold leap into the future. Those who saw it knifing its way through the skies over Muroc will never forget. One of its test pilots was a young Californian named Captain Glenn Edwards. Along with Major Dan Forbes, he was flying one of the prototypes in June of 1948 when it broke apart in the sky northwest of the base. All 5 crew members were lost. In December of 1949, Muroc Air Force Base was renamed in honor of the young test pilot. As the base entered the 50s, the tempo increased dramatically. A wide variety of new types and models of aircraft appeared on the flight line every year, as Edwards became known as the place where the rubber meets the ramp. It had long since become the de facto center of American flight research, and in June of 1951, that status was finally recognized officially, as the base was designated the U.S. Air Force Flight Test Center. A $120 million master plan was implemented to build an entirely new main base complex north of the existing facility. But the mission went far beyond flight testing. At the north end of the lake bed, tests were being run on a 2,000-foot deceleration track where Colonel John Stapp and his team of aeromedical researchers were studying the human body's tolerance for G-forces and developing safety equipment that would save countless lives. Using himself as a test subject, Stapp ultimately proved that when properly restrained, the human body was amazingly resilient. The world's fastest railroad was in operation at the south end of the lake bed, likened to an outdoor wind tunnel, because everything from airfoils and aerodynamic shapes to ejection systems and other aircraft components could be tested in real-world conditions. A 10,000-foot high-speed sled track permitted speeds of more than 1,500 miles per hour. While the rocket sleds blistered across the flatlands below, another, much different enterprise was getting underway, high on a granite ridge overlooking the lake bed. At the Air Force's captive missile test site, the ground quaked with the massive roar of the rocket engines that would begin to launch America into the space age.
Back in the 30s and 40s, men had come to Muroc to train for combat. In the early 50s, they started coming to train as test pilots. By the time the Air Force's Experimental Test Pilot School moved from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base to Edwards in 1951, the role of the test pilot had undergone a radical change from the pre-jet era. The job had always required exceptional precision flying skills, keen powers of observation, coolness under pressure, and the ability to fly a mission exactly as planned. But the young pilots of the 50s faced a much more complex situation. The arrival of the jet engine, along with an incredible proliferation of onboard systems, had greatly magnified the difficulties inherent in the job. In addition to new problems of stability and control, the high-speed envelope left a much smaller margin for error. The amount of time in which to make critical decisions was dramatically compressed. The ever-increasing complexity of the aircraft gave test pilots a lot more to think about. Thus, in addition to exceptional flying skills, applicants to the school now had to have solid engineering backgrounds. And once they entered, they were subjected to an increasingly rigorous academic curriculum before they got the opportunity to learn the intricacies of performance testing. For they had to learn to control airspeed to the nearest knot and hold their altitude at extraordinarily precise levels to define how far, how fast, and how efficiently an airplane could fly. They went on to learn how to evaluate the subtle nuances of aircraft stability and control and the often breathtaking intangibles of spin testing. They had to learn the art of dispassionate data collection while gyrating and plummeting toward an onrushing lake bed. There was no dearth of qualified applicants because by the early 50s, a whole mystique had grown up about Edwards. It had become a mecca for the very best. Men like Chuck Yeager, Tony LeVere, Bob Hoover, Bill Bridgman, Scott Crossfield, Pete Everest, and Fitz Fulton. In an age fascinated by higher, faster, farther, these men gained worldwide fame. A great many others were lost, riding on the cutting edge of calamity. But they came nevertheless, because if it was new, if it was fast, if it was unconventional, it was at Edwards, and it was there that they could pit their skills against the very best among their peers. Then as now, test pilots were intensely competitive, but not always cocky. They were supremely self-confident. They had to be. They were courageous. They were also disciplined and cautious, always methodically calculating the odds. They were not careless. They couldn't afford to be. There wasn't any margin for error in their business. Knowledge and careful preparation were survival tools. The popular image of the devil-may-care test pilot raising hell all night and breaking records the next morning was largely a fiction of tabloid journalism.
As Chuck Yeager once so aptly put it, you can't hoot with the owls all night and fly with the eagles all day. It just don't work that way. But competitive, yes. By late 1953, the NACA's Scott Crossfield had already taken the Navy's D-558-2 Douglas skyrocket out to Mach 1.96. Pretty good for an airplane which hadn't been designed to fly that fast. But he wanted that next magic number, Mach 2. And he knew that just down the flight line, Yeager was preparing to fly the X-1A, which had been designed to easily exceed that speed. On November 20th, he went up knowing it would be his last chance, and flying an extraordinarily precise profile, he was able to hit Mach 2.005 in a shallow dive. 3 weeks later, Yeager went up intending to obliterate his rival's new record. And indeed he did. But shortly after hitting Mach 2.44, 1,650 miles per hour, he encountered something terrifyingly new as the X-1A tumbled violently out of control. It was called inertial coupling. The X-1A was literally spinning about all three of its axes. Somehow, after tumbling downward wildly for more than 40,000 feet, he recovered to level flight and with superb flying skill, brought the airplane back to fly another day. Just 8 months later, Major Kit Murray flew it up above 90,000 feet. Their record stood for less than 3 years. By July of 1956, Lieutenant Colonel Frank Pete Everest had flown the Bell X-2 all the way out to Mach 2.87, where he began to encounter the effects of aerodynamic heating. But he warned of serious stability problems at that speed. Then, in early September, Captain Ivan C. Kincheloe, Jr. claimed a new altitude mark as he climbed above 126,000 feet. 3 weeks later, on his first flight in a rocket airplane, Captain Milburn Mel Apt took it up for an assault on Mach 3. He sped to Mach 3.2 that day, more than 2,000 miles per hour. He became the fastest man alive, but only for brief moments. Shortly after hitting top speed, the X-2 spun violently out of control. Bitten like Yeager by inertial coupling, Apt struggled gallantly to recover the craft. His efforts were in vain. Mach 3 had been conquered, but at a terrible price. Not all of the research involved rocket planes. The Air Force, along with the NACA, conducted a whole series of programs with exotic research vehicles. The XF-92A demonstrated the feasibility of the Delta Wing. It introduced pilots to the touchiness of hydraulically boosted, irreversible flight controls. The needle-nosed X-3 Stiletto was ultimately used to explore the problem of high-speed instability. The X-4 Bantam studied the transonic flying qualities of a swept-wing, semi-tailless design. The X-5 demonstrated the performance advantages to be gained by sweeping the wings forward and aft in flight, a concept that would later bear fruit in the design of several frontline combat aircraft. And the unmanned Mach 2 X-10 laid the foundation for remote control of a variety of high-performance drone vehicles. Runway vulnerability had long been a major concern. Project Zelmo, with zero-length launch and matte landing, was one of the solutions posed to deal with it. The Zel part proved feasible. Strap a rocket booster on the belly of an F-84, ignite it, and 2.5 seconds later, you're safely airborne. But the Mal part proved just a little more difficult. Zelmo was not the answer. What was needed were true VTOL, or vertical takeoff and landing airplanes. Powered by counter-rotating props, the XF-V1 was supposed to take off and land vertically and transition to conventional flight. Though capable of in-flight transitions, it never achieved either a vertical takeoff or landing. But the jet-powered X-13 Vertijet successfully demonstrated both. And by proving that VTOL flight was possible on jet thrust alone, it opened up a whole new arena of flight. All of the esoteric data from the research programs was applied to the development of new operational designs, and the 50s finally saw the culmination of the turbojet revolution, with the development of aircraft which embodied a mature blending of efficient turbojet propulsion and streamlined aerodynamic design. This was nowhere more evident than with the arrival of the famous Century series of truly supersonic fighters, the F-100 Super Sabre, the F-101 Voodoo, the F-102 Delta Dagger, the Mach 2 F-104 Starfighter, the F-105 Thunder Chief, later known more simply as the Thud, the F-106 Delta Dart, hailed as the ultimate interceptor, and the F-107 Ultra Sabre, the only Century Series fighter not to go into operational service. These truly spectacular airplanes defined the basic speed and altitude envelopes for fighters for the rest of the century. And yet each of them also arrived at Edwards with critical flaws which required years of patient effort to eliminate. But of course, that's always been the purpose of flight testing. High-performance fighters were only part of the story. Test pilots and engineers refined the capabilities of everything from a new turboprop heavy freighter, the C-133 Cargo Master, to the extremely agile and versatile C-130 Hercules, a classic design which would become the model for tactical transports, and the first jet-powered tanker, the KC-135 Stratotanker, which would remain in service until well into the next century, as well as a new, truly intercontinental strategic bomber, the YB-52 Stratofortress, which would provide the safety net of nuclear deterrence for more than a generation. And by the end of the 50s, the sleek B-58 Hustler, the delta-winged bomber which would establish some speed and time to climb records, would still have yet to be broken. As the 60s opened, a group of pilots were undergoing zero-G and other types of training at Edwards. They'd go on to win celebrity status as the Mercury astronauts. They were the first of 3 groups of astronauts whose exploits remained front-page news as they were catapulted into space in cone-shaped capsules. But there was another group of pilots at Edwards who'd make the journey by a much different means. A rocket-powered airplane, the North American X-15. As the decade opened, Scott Crossfield, who'd helped design the airplane, was completing its flight worthiness demonstration in preparation for the combined Air Force, NASA, and Navy program to probe the unknowns of hypersonic and near-space flight. Then, within the brief span of 8 months in 1961, the X-15's awesome potential was finally unleashed as it became the first aircraft to exceed Mach 4, 5, and 6. The pilot who made each of those flights, Major Robert M. White, was also the first to fly it in space, as he climbed above 300,000 feet the following year. And in August of 1963, NASA's Joe Walker took it all the way up to 354,000 feet, or 67 miles above the Earth's surface, a record which still stands. 12 men flew the X-15. 8 of them became astronauts by flying an airplane through space. And one of them would go on to become the first man to set foot on the moon. But the program wasn't free of incidents. In November of 1962, for example, NASA's Jack McKay lost power shortly after launch and was forced to attempt an emergency landing on Cutterback Lake in Nevada with nearly full fuel tanks and without landing flaps. At touchdown, the left gear failed. McKay survived the incident, but the airplane looked like a total loss. It was resurrected, however, as the X-15A2, with a pair of jettisonable external fuel tanks to enable it to reach for higher speeds, and covered with a thermal protection coating to protect it from the 2,000-degree heat expected at those speeds. Major Pete Knight took it all the way out to Mach 6.7, 4,520 miles per hour, one day in October 1967. But at a speed more than twice that of a .50 caliber bullet, the thermal protection failed, permitting torch-like hypersonic air to incinerate parts of the ventral tail, and only by dint of his exceptional piloting skills was he able to bring it safely back. Charred by its wild ride through the inferno of re-entry, it would never fly again. Pete Knight's record still remains the highest speed at which any man has ever flown in an airplane. As the pace of the space program gained momentum, there were all kinds of related activities at Edwards. At the NASA facility, for instance, they were testing an ungainly-looking machine which symbolized one of man's greatest aspirations, the Lunar Landing Research Vehicle. And at the test pilot school, renamed the Aerospace Research Pilot School, students were now introduced to such arcane subjects as thermodynamics, orbital mechanics, and bioastronautics, and given training in a wide variety of machines designed to simulate various space flight conditions. The training they received served them well, and a great many of them, like Jim McDivitt, Frank Borman, and Michael Collins, would go on to make their marks in space. While spaceflight captured the nation's imagination, the Flight Test Center was still in business to evaluate airplanes. A new supersonic trainer, the T-38 Talon. A rugged new fighter, the F-4 Phantom II, which went on to become a mainstay of the Tactical Air Command. A pair of new transports, the C-141 Starlifter and its big brother, the gargantuan C-5A Galaxy. And a new Mach 2 fighter bomber, the Swing Wing F-111. While those who tested these airplanes didn't get much publicity, their work could be every bit as thrilling as a Mach 5 re-entry in the X-15.
Okay, it's sitting. That's a sit. Okay, it's a 10. Yeah. Okay, now go ahead. Okay. It looks like a filter, right? Yeah, yeah. Opposite order. Full rudder. 40, coming to full. Okay. Wait a minute. Keep the stick forward. Coming forward. Girl. Going back into the spin, I think. Yeah, I think it is. All right. 10, 4, 6. Now it's covered. You got it. You got it. I just like the story. This was my game off. You got it. It's for you. You got it. You got it. 16. Get out, mate. 14. Eject.
They were a pair of aircraft whose incredibly advanced capabilities still dazzled the imagination. The mammoth 500,000-pound XB-70 Valkyrie was almost routinely flown at Mach 3 speeds and altitudes of 70,000 feet. More impressive still was the mysterious YF-12 Blackbird. Predecessor of the legendary SR-71, this remarkable airplane was able to cruise for extended periods at speeds in excess of Mach 3 and at altitudes somewhere above 80,000 feet. On a single day at Edwards in May of 1965, it set no less than 9 world speed and altitude records without in any way taxing its full potential. While some pilots cruised along at better than 2,000 miles per hour, others explored the concept of laminar flow control, the elimination of drag-inducing boundary layer turbulence over the wings of the X-21A. And still others continued the study of VTOL flight. The experimental X-18 tilt-wing aircraft spawned the much more ambitious XC-142. Pilots could transition its entire